Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Paperny with Compliance Mitigation, continuing our training with an incredible case study. Is that hyperbole? Is that too much? I think it's an incredible case study. Anytime we can learn from executives who made bad decisions with practical takeaways to ensure that your company is more compliant, I think it's a game-changing case study. I'm also biased because our team wrote it, including a very valuable team member, Larry Hartman, who went to Columbia. I became embroiled in the criminal justice system, learned a great deal. So I'm really grateful for Larry taking the time to produce this case study. And I'm excited to share it with you. When we talk about white collar crime, there's so much to talk about white collar crime. Books have been written about white collar crime. Many of them will put you to sleep. I don't want to put you to sleep. I want to teach you in a practical way that it will ensure when you leave this case study and this course, you are better prepared to make good decisions in the face of business. And I've said it again repeatedly. Say too many times when people make bad decisions, they attempt to cover it up and pretend that this isn't happening, or pretend that the government is going to see them as a good person who isn't capable of doing this. Sometimes people are so in shock and awe that they are embroiled in a white collar crime government investigation that, beyond feigning ignorance, that's one thing, they just flat out lie. And in this case study we're going to get into today, we title Fraudulent Claims for Tax Credits. You're going to hear as we discuss repeatedly the post-defense conduct, what the company did after they got into trouble, or what these executives did, because of course you can't put a company in prison. You can't put executives in prison. And you're going to hear terms like obstruction of justice. I can relate to obstruction of justice because I did that in my own case. Why? I did not want the government to perceive me as a criminal. I did not want them to think that I was capable of doing bad things. I wanted them to perceive me as a USC graduate, as someone who contributed to my community. And of course, I lied and didn't work openly with our lawyers. So lawyers frequently in our company, Compliance Mitigation, companies that are under government investigation, one of the first tools or tasks we give them or encourage them to do is to make sure that their legal team, if they're involved in an investigation, knows every detail, every nuance, all of the specific details, because lawyers sometimes are worthy of criticism, but oftentimes they can't do their job if the defendant doesn't tell them everything. Now, every now and again, I think that sort of responsibility with the lawyer to ensure that they're asking probing questions, to ensure that the lawyer is pulling as much information out of them as possible. The lawyer has to do a good job of making the client feel comfortable about sharing details that are so foreign to them. When I say foreign, that includes talking about breaking the law or making bad decisions, or in this case, fraudulent claims for tax credits. So part of what we do at Compliance Mitigation is we do an extensive, call it an audit or a compelling narrative, where we may write out, could be a 5-hour interview, could be a 10-hour interview. We record the interview and write it out, every detail of the person's life. And then we take that information and we may share it with all of the stakeholders, a lawyer, a government investigator, so they can learn more about the defendant through their own words. So I'm going to transition into this case study here in a moment, but it's very tragic when government investigations begin, but then the problems are exacerbated by bad decisions the defendants make. So if you unfortunately ever become embroiled in a government investigation, civil or criminal, you've got to stop the bleeding. You got to make matters, you can't make matters worse. You've got to speak openly and honestly with counsel. And that means you also have to vet and find a lawyer that you afford, that you feel is frankly vested in the case, that has an interest in working with you beyond you just giving him or her money, but because they're committed to getting you the best outcome. Companies grow, compliance is mandatory. The question is, when are you going to pay for it? You can pay for it on the front end and create a program that you can defend and be proud of and create a culture, especially as companies grow. We have worked with executives. In fact, I can't yet mention the company, but at Compliance Mitigation, we're going to begin working with a company that just years ago was doing, it was just like two dudes working 23 hours a day, growing something from zero to something, $1 million in revenues, 3 million, 5 million. And then before you know it, there's 15 people on the trading floor, or the floor. It's like, well, how did this happen? Then before you know it, there's 30 people on the trading floor, and then 100 employees, and you're doing $40 million a year in revenues. And the whole culture has changed. Is there even a culture? It started off with two guys. You have people on the floor saying things to potential consumers, knowing that one complaint can derail everything that you're trying to do. So to this company's credit, they reached out to compliance mitigation and said, we've grown from nothing to something. We have 100 people on our floor. They need to be trained. They need to know there are consequences if they say the wrong thing to a consumer. We want to be able to reward them for doing the right thing, even if it doesn't bring in business. So that's an ideal client. They're not involved in a government investigation. They have done nothing wrong, yet they're being proactive. And they recognize if, God forbid, an investigation were to come, a decent lawyer here in Orange County, it's going to be a couple $100,000, right? So they can implement something on the front end, perhaps compliance training every month per employee. It could be as low as $25, nothing. But the employee completes the training, they get proof of completion, the evidence, a certificate, and it shows they're committed beyond just bugs of integrity, doing the right thing. They're committed to training. So I'd encourage you to do the same thing. So as I transition into this case study, you should go to compliancemitigation.com. You should enroll in our Compliance 101 program. Go through the case studies, answer the questions. Then from there, you're going to get the certificate for the completed quiz. And it shows that you're more than talk. You're committed to education and doing the right thing and setting the appropriate tone within your company. With all of that said, I'm now ready. I'm ready to transition into this case study written by our colleague and friend, Larry Hartman. So like we do in all of our case studies, I think it's essential we open up with the learning objectives. Upon completion of this case study, you should understand that the government will pursue actions even after the individuals have suffered serious financial consequences and are no longer in business. Over the years, we've had people reach out to us to say, you're not going to believe this. I got a target letter from the FBI. My business is now defunct. We're broke, or things been closed for 5 years. I just got a target letter. That's insane. They're not going to get anything. Feds don't work that way. If they have learned of wrongdoing, either through their own investigation or through a whistleblower or through a cooperating informant, and even if there is no money for them to collect for victims, they're going to prosecute and pursue justice to ensure that this conduct doesn't continue. I think that's just really critical here. You just don't do something wrong, shut down the business, move on and say, it's all good. No, it doesn't work that way. Their job is to ferret out crime. Funny story about the FBI. So in my case, I formed a relationship with the FBI agent who arrested me. His name is Paul Bertrand, now retired, great guy. He brought me out to the FBI Academy to speak in March of 2011. I did this great training for agents. And following the presentation at the FBI, I got like a whole tour of the Academy, like right out of Silence of the Lambs down there with Hannibal Lecter, really crazy stuff, a lot of fun. I've always said the FBI is great, except when they're arresting me. And I was speaking with Paul and I said, so like, what do you guys do all day? You just investigate crime all day? You just pursue government investigations? Like, yeah, that's our job. I said, well, do you understand the anxiety that people go through? He's like, I have a better understanding of the anxiety based on your presentation. And in that presentation, I articulated that the hardest part of the journey for people is before you go to prison, or just dealing with the fallout, or unknowing. Is unknowing a word here? I don't think that applies, but I'm going to stick with it. The unknown that accompanies a government investigation. And I said, so how long are your investigations going back? He's like, I got investigations going back 6 or 7 or 8 years. I said, 8 or 6, 7 years? He's like, yeah, in some cases 10 years if the statutes allow it. Then we'll get, we can extend it if necessary. It's pretty easy for them to extend the conspiracy or the statute if they really want to. That's one thing I've learned. And I said, so when do you make these sort of decisions, or do you understand the anxiety? He said, you know what, Justin, we go to IHOP, we're having pancakes, we're living our life, we're doing our job. We're always going to look for crime. We're always going to ferret out crime. That's what we do, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, companies are out of business, the person has or does not have money. We are an equal opportunity pursuer of justice. It's a very good point. They're living their job, doing their job, living their life, having pancakes at IHOP, while people under government investigation are stressed. They can't get out of bed. They can't brush their teeth. It's very difficult. Keep that in mind as you're running a business. It can be years and years, and waiting can be the absolute. I think it was Tom Petty who said waiting is the hardest part. So I want you to consider that as you're engaged in conduct, potentially bad conduct, whether ethical or civil or criminal, whatever it may be. Eventually they're going to find out, and it can really derail your life, and it can be years later. Back to the learning objectives. We want to describe how even small companies can benefit from considering and implementing internal compliance controls. That's exactly what this company I mentioned a few minutes ago was doing. They started with 2 employees working 23 hours a day. Now they're doing $30 million a year. They got 100 people on their trading floor. And it's like, wow, we've grown. We need to put compliance controls in place to ensure our culture is sound, that we say one thing and follow through on it. We're not hypocritical, that everyone is treated the same way. When employees come on an onboarding process, a training process, consequences of doing the wrong thing process, from firing to sanction to whatever it may be. Very deliberate, very thorough. Every company should have it as you're growing. The culture is going to change as people come on board. We're going to explain the basic rules of biofuel tax credits. I'm going to have to read that verbatim from this case study, because if I were asked to give a description of biofuel tax credits, I would fail. We're also going to identify ways to better protect themselves from poor decision-making driven by desperation. Through our work, as we identify what is white-collar crime, well, white-collar crime is made up of really 3 components. There's a pressure that people face. They may rationalize that pressure, and some people will seize an opportunity, oftentimes out of desperation. I think there's this myth with white-collar crime that it's all sort of rich people who are stealing in a Ponzi-type faction to, fund their Bentley or private jet. Oftentimes, it's just to pay the health insurance. It's just to pay the rent. It's out of pure desperation. I mean, we've worked with people over the years caught up in government investigations. They were a loan officer for a major company whose compensation was tied to funding a loan, because they didn't get paid unless the loan was funded. So there are these liar loans. You like the quotes here? Liar loans. Apparently, they say everyone did it. Guess what? If the bank gets defrauded through a short sale or a foreclosure and they investigate, we've worked with lenders who have gone to prison for facilitating these liar loans. It wasn't, in some cases, it's actually been the person who filled out the application, of course. They, of course, then say, well, the mortgage broker told me to write this. I know I'm digressing here, but I think it's important to understand desperation is key in white-collar crime. It's not just rich people looking to fund their expensive, lavish lifestyle. Sometimes it could just be, I need an extra $1,500 a month to pay the rent and mortgage. Who's the audience here? Individuals who own or work in small and mid-sized companies. And we really do want to educate everyone listening, educate you on the importance of adhering to principled and honest practices, even in the face of stark financial circumstances. Making the right decision may cost you today, but it's okay. You can rebuild, you can regrow. There's nothing more devastating than a government investigation that could turn criminal, that could cost you your liberty, your reputation, your license. It's just all bad. I really want you to think about that before you make any decision in business. Some of the terms we're going to cover in this case study, I'm actually going to get very creative here with my, there it is, fraudulent claims. Okay. Some of the terms we're going to cover in this case study in EPA, biofuel tax credits, and cooperation. So here's the industry current state. Many small to mid-sized businesses teeter on the brink of survival from time to time. There may be temporary shortfall of income or some unexpected large expenses that cause ownership and management to make very difficult decisions. Sometimes those circumstances may even drive them to contemplate violating the law. In so doing, they may solve a short-term problem, but they open themselves up to long-term exposure for legal consequences. I've seen some of that in some of these small biotech companies we've worked with over the years, where they're like one product away, one invention away from going, to $1 billion status. But in the interim, they're bleeding resources. They can barely make payroll. They're making presentations to try to raise more money. It's just, one decision away. And in the interim, sometimes they make decisions that can be disastrous. Background: Keystone. The situation: a small pioneering biofuel company and its principals found themselves in dire financial straits as a result of the Great Recession. They turned to faking the production of biofuel and falsifying records to survive. This enabled the company to claim and sell tax credits for which it did not qualify. The company temporarily staved off financial ruin, but ultimately faced serious legal consequences. So here's the background of the company. Okay, Keystone Biofuels was founded in 2005, operated in the biofuel space, providing bulk, fuel delivery services, including oil, gas, and alternative fuels, pioneering the Pennsylvania renewable fuel industry. As part of its business, Keystone produced biofuels, which is a type of renewable fuel mixing such as alternatives as ethanol with petroleum in a process that meets standards set by the American Society for Testing in Materials and adopted by the EPA, entitling Keystone for tax credits on each gallon of renewable fuel processed. And who could actually go through this without reading this? I could read this 100 times and never be able to say it as well. Wow, that is technical. Now, from August 09 through the Great Recession period through September 13, the company generated renewable fuel credits identified by renewable ID numbers on biofuel to claim tax credits based on the biodiesel mixture tax credit. Okay, let's continue. This tax credit program entitled persons or businesses who mix biodiesel with petroleum and use or sell the mixture as a fuel to claim federal excise tax credits. The fuel and the RINs have material financial value and can be sold and purchased by participants within the federal renewable fuels commercial system. Okay, we're making progress here. We're moving along. Work with me here. The company's owners, Ben Wooten and Race Miner, knew each other for a very long time and had fairly extensive experience in the alternative biofuels business. They hired David Teal to serve as Keystone's Director of Business Development. The recession took a great toll on their business, placing them precariously on the precipice of bankruptcy and financial ruin. As a result, the partners, along with an employee named David Teal, began producing fuel that did not meet the standards required for the EPA program. In some instances, they never even bothered to produce any fuel at all. They nonetheless claimed these biofuel credits and sold them in the open market. In an attempt to hide their scheme, the men created false corporate books and records and sham financial transactions to account for the non-existent and non-qualified fuel in an attempt to create the appearance of legitimacy. All the ill-gotten gains were pumped into the company to keep it alive. For a while, Keystone rebounded and expanded, producing a quality product. Miner sold his shares to the company to Wooten during this time. That revival, however, didn't last. Keystone suffered about $2 million in losses in 2012. Wooten filed for bankruptcy on behalf of the company, and Teal set out professionally on his own. A federal investigation began shortly thereafter. Federal agents from the EPA approached Teal with a late-night knock on his door. In March of 2014, he began cooperating immediately. It's interesting when the FBI shows up at your home with FBI. They're not very conspicuous. I mean, it's a navy blue jacket with the white letters, the yellow letters FBI. That's enough to shake and scare you. It's incredible the power that comes with that. Oftentimes the FBI agents are very quiet. They're in some ways even deferential and humble. They say, hello, I'm so-and-so with the FBI. And it's incredible how many defendants are like, okay, I did it. What can I do? I'm scared. What do you want to know? I can help you. And they've said 9 words. So the power that comes with that jacket and the title, sort of a big deal. And in this case, I would applaud Teal if his goal is the shortest sentence in the most favorable institution, preferably his home. I mean, who wants to stand for count in prison unless you don't have to, or who wants to stand for count in prison longer than is necessary? No one. So basically, he's fortunate that they got to him first. He's incredibly fortunate because in so many cases, they may get to you last, and you may then say, I'd love to cooperate. And they say, oh, there's no need for you to cooperate. We're good. There's nothing for us to know because we already know everything. You saw a lot of that in the Varsity Blues case, of which we did a separate course. There was one cooperating informant that kind of helped lead to 50 indictments. And some people in that case who wanted to cooperate were told, we have everything we know. There's no cooperation credit we need from you, because the mastermind in that case, Rick Singer, cooperated against everyone. So there could have been a coach at Georgetown, a coach at Stanford who might have been in a position to offer credit. But by the time they got to them, the government knew absolutely everything. So it was a break for Teal that the government knocked on his door first, and he made a very wise decision, if his goal is the shortest sentence, to begin cooperating immediately. Some people call cooperators snitches, get stitches, nonsense, things like that. I've known myriad people who said they would never cooperate, who end up cooperating. Why? Because their goal is the shortest sentence to get the most favorable outcome. And of course, we work with some people who would say, no one else is going to get into trouble as a result of what I did. I'm not going to say anything. That too is a principled position, even if it may mean or will mean a longer federal prison term. So here's the analysis. Indictments came down for Wooten and Minor in May of 2017. Here's the thing, I just mentioned 2012, 2017. I can assure you during this 5-year window, these guys were off their game because they know something's coming. Now, sometimes some people get so convinced themselves nothing will ever come from it. But when you've done that type of crime and creating documents and statements and fabrications and scheming, it's inevitable someone's going to find out. So that 5-year window, in many ways, they were already in prison. That's like the real pain of a government investigation. In fact, I attended a sentencing hearing recently in front of Judge David Carter here in Santa Ana. And at our sentencing, he told our client, I think it's cruel and inhumane the government has made you go through this process for more than 5 years. You have lived in a dungeon this whole time, Judge Carter told our client. Well, that's the truth. It is very difficult to wait this long. So in 2017, Wooten and Minor were indicted, alleging that they conspired to make and subsequently make false statements to the EPA. Those charges stem from Keystone Biofuels' claims that its products met the necessary standards to qualify as biodiesel and receive the tax credits. The government later filed a superseding indictment charging obstruction of justice from the creation of false books and records. Again, we're kind of speaking to the post-defense conduct here, lying to the EPA, obstructing justice. It just goes from bad to worse in a hurry. Again, if you've done something wrong, whether civil or criminal, the more quickly you own it, hire the right lawyer, speak openly and honestly with your lawyer. And in some cases, you can then, if you're still running and you're in business, you can do what some of our clients at Compliance Mitigation do, which is actually put and create a compliance program in place. So down the road, if it turns civil to criminal, you can show that you've taken steps to remediate, to fix it, to ensure that this never happens again. That's proactive. And it's got to, of course, the program's got to be earnest, it's got to be serious, it's got to be practical. It can't just be window dressing to tell people you have it. It actually has to be implemented. But that could help down the road if civil became criminal by showing that you have this platform in place that shows a corrected behavior and that you're willing to make changes. Very important for companies to have the compliance, but also if you're in this investigation to create something. Naturally, as some do, Wooten and Minor elected to go to trial and fight the charges. Teal continued to cooperate with government prosecutors, culminating in more than 3 days on the witness stand. According to his lawyer, he endured fierce cross-examination by 2 veteran defense attorneys. Teal subsequently pleaded guilty to one count of conspiring to defraud the IRS, receiving a sentence of 3 years probation. So here's the way it works. Up here, I mentioned that federal agents from the EPA approached Teal. He began cooperating immediately. There's no doubt that even though they got the felony plea and he was unable to avoid prosecution, he'll be a convicted felon for the rest of his life, like me, but can learn to live with it and overcome it. At times well, that's a different conversation. But still, he was unable to avoid the government investigation. He got the felony plea, but by virtue of his cooperation, and it appeared to be honest cooperation, enduring fierce examination by 2 experienced criminal defense attorneys, he was successful, and he got a sentence of 3 years probation, which is essentially you're free. It's fine. You're kind of subjugated to a degree to a probation officer for a little while, but it ain't prison. Okay, so that's a very good thing. Teal's sentence was clearly mitigated by his cooperation and the fact also that the government considered him a minor participant who only received a salary, as stated in his plea agreement. Certainly, those are mitigating factors the government considered. The jurors deliberated over a span of 2 days before handing down 9 guilty verdicts for co-owners Wooten and Minor, including counts of conspiracy to make false statements to the EPA, 6 counts of making false statements to the EPA, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the IRS, 1 count of aiding and abetting in the filing of a false claim with the IRS. They each received sentences of 70 months in prison, plus fines and penalties totaling over $9 million. So here's kind of the tragedy of it. They were in prison for the 5 years waiting from 2012 to 2017. Then they go through the expense and aggravation and shame of a trial and conviction. Then they get the 70 months in prison. Then they're going to have at least 3 years of supervised release. It's really like the whole decade has been derailed, right? And it was exacerbated by bad decisions they made. So you've got to credit Teal, who began to make really good decisions in the post-defense stage. And you got to, knock Wooten and Minor. Now, they may tell you I went to trial for a reason. We don't believe we did anything wrong. I would continue to go to trial again and again and again, even if I know there's going to be a longer prison term. And there's something to be said for that. There are people in this country that go to trial knowing the odds are against them, knowing the majority of people who go to trial lose. So the fact that they went, in some people's eyes, they'd say they probably had to be innocent because no fool in their right mind would go to trial knowing what the odds are. We'll never know. I don't know. What we do know is it's been a very difficult time in their life, and it could have been changed probably had they had compliance in place, had they made better decisions and recognized that it's okay to go out of business, but it's not okay to cheat and steal because you can always rebuild, regrow, rebrand, and do it again and learn from previous losses. I mean, how many billionaires and millionaires today had businesses that once failed? Do it again. You don't steal and cheat and obstruct justice. Recommendations. We have a few minutes left here in this case study. Super excited. Wow, we're 25 minutes in. Recommendations. Even owners and employees of small companies require reminders of the importance of compliance. During its height, Keystone was generating millions of dollars in revenues, providing the company with resources to dedicate towards compliance. The company, however, chose to blow off compliance. Was an unnecessary expense that got in the way of profits. Consequences be damned. Thus, when faced with desperate circumstances, company ownership and management chose to break the law in an attempt to save the company without objective concern for the consequences that could and would ensue. Complying with the law must be an inviolate principle of every business. Sure, sometimes uncertainty arises, and during such occasions, leadership should seek out counsel and advice to make the best decision to benefit the company and guard against impropriety. That's why our corporate code of ethics is important. But really what matters is the culture. Is it carried out every single day, or is your corporate code just words on a page or a binder that you dust off at quarterly conferences and meetings or things that you do to appease shareholders and stakeholders and things like that? Is it legitimate? There is no good justification for breaking the law. Prosecutors will care very little for the desperation of the situation. Breaking the law is open to shut. That kind of comes back to what I said about the FBI agents enjoying pancakes at IHOP. Huge fan of IHOP, by the way, and Denny's. Don't knock Denny's. Big fan of Denny's and IHOP. That's essentially what the FBI was saying, right? Prosecutors will care little for the desperation of the situation. They also don't care how long it is, how long ago it was. Presuming it's within the statute of limitations, they're going to get you. I actually asked Paul Bertrand one time, have they ever let some cases go? And he said the only time in my career that happened was after 9/11, when so much attention went to security that there were some cases that we were investigating and we didn't have the resources to pursue. And those defendants got lucky because there were some big frauds they had to walk away from because so much attention went to security and terrorism. That's the only time he told me that investigations have been shunned and some people got lucky, primarily due to statutes of limitations. Companies of all sizes must concern themselves with compliance in order to best protect the business of the company and liberty of those working there. Future state. Government investigators and prosecutors are not therapists. They follow a rigid set of rules established by laws. They have little care or concerns for the reasons people break the law, even if it stems from serious events like the Great Recession. I'm going to close with that thought in a moment. The law is also not fair. Sure, the rules apply equally to everyone. However, not everyone who breaks the law gets caught and faces legal jeopardy. Nonetheless, companies and people of all stripes are indicted and go to prison every single day. When you break the law, you play Russian roulette with your liberty and the potential for financial ruin. As governments grow, so will the Justice Department and the number of people prosecuted under its authority. So I want to close this course and case study with something right here that comes up a lot. And again, thank you very much for going through this course. I know it's been a lot of work and I'm grateful for your attention. If you have questions for our team, you can go to compliancemitigation.com or here. And we'd love to work with you, even if it's just providing more clarity on what we do, how your company can become compliant if you're not under any government investigation, or if unfortunately you think you could be, but we're here to help and we want to play a role in ensuring that your company continues to thrive and grow and be profitable. Coming back to this future state, I'm going to turn over to Federal Prison Consultant now, which is what I do through our sister company, White Collar Advice, as we talk about white collar crime. This is very important that Larry wrote. I really appreciated him writing this. It's really introspective and thoughtful. Even if it stems from serious from some serious event like the Great Recession. There are a number of people who faced massive pressures during the Great Recession, right? The job losses, the financial devastation, people lost their homes. It was significant. Similar in what we've seen over the last 12 months with COVID-19. And our team has attended 1,000 sentencing hearings during our career over the last 12 years. And I attended a lot of sentencing hearings where defendants talked about the Great Recession, talked about the economy imploding, talked about their inability to get a job, talked about the struggle to pay their rent or mortgage or health insurance, talked about the pressures they face from their employer to produce at all costs. All of these are pressures, and they are absolutely real. And there is no joke that they're real. But let me tell you something. A federal judge in Illinois said to a defendant one time. I attended a sentencing hearing. The judge said, there are a lot of people who face pressures every single day, especially during this Great Recession. A lot of people who have lost everything. The foreclosure rates are through the roof. A lot of people who rationalize these pressures, that it's not fair, that the rich get richer while someone like me gets stomped on. And I was fired due to downsizing, even though I performed my job beautifully. But here's the difference between them and you. They didn't cheat. When faced with pressures, they sucked it up. Was it Nietzsche who talked about by the bootstraps? Judge essentially said that. They sucked it up. They embraced faith. They embraced their family. They embraced their values. They understood this would be a blip in their life. Understood they may get it with dignity. They didn't cheat. You did. Do not use that as an excuse in my courtroom. Millions of Americans face worse pressures than you did, and they didn't cheat. So I share this with you because as I close this course, I'll reiterate, we're all going to face pressures. Everyone. We can't live life without facing some pressure. And it's very, very easy to rationalize them. The question as I close this course, do you want to be like the guys here who seized an opportunity due to financial desperation when they could have just started over? Do you want to be like me who seized an opportunity to break the law for money when I was a 27-year-old stockbroker? Or do you want to say, we all face pressures. I'm going to handle it with dignity, with a plan, with strength, with family? Are you going to embrace your values? One of your values should be freedom. One of your values should be family. One of your values should be compliance / character / integrity / discipline. The people with whom we work who are under government investigations are good people who never imagined they would end up here. Yet it was a circumstance or two, a text message, an email, the desire to close a deal, an inability to say no, that significantly derailed their lives and embroiled them in a government investigation, and the consequences are lifelong. And that's how I'm going to close. And I really applaud Larry for writing that. Even if it stems from serious event like the Great Depression, we all face pressures and stress. Make the right choice, don't succumb, resist temptation, and you'll never become embroiled in a situation like these executives were from this fraudulent claiming for tax credits. Thank you so much again for enrolling in this course. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a note at Compliance Mitigation. Let's chat, let's talk, see if we can help you. Be well and for taking this course.